Welcome to Running for Real, a global community with a shared love and curiosity for running. Together we reconnect with the reasons why we love to run and discover ways it helps us become better people. Whether it's the quiet moments of a morning run while the rest of the world still sleeps, or befriending the strangers next to you at the start line of a race, we are here to connect with others who see running as the common thread that weaves our lives together. Come join me, Tina Muir, as I talk with people from all walks of life, united by a love of running. Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 437 of the Running for Real podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I am excited that you're here and excited for this returning guest who I always have fascinating conversations with and learn so much from. Now, he is back on the show. Alex Hutchinson is here. He's back because he has another book out. Alex, however, you're going to hear, it's been quite a while since his last book came out, and you're going to get to hear the background of why that is, why he didn't force one through. And actually, when I say a while, his last book, Endure, was 2018. That's quite some time for an author. But he is back with a book that he is really proud of. It's had a big impact on me. I read it cover to cover. And The Explorer's Gene, Why We Seek Big Challenges, New Flavors, and the Blank Spots on the Map. This book has really impacted the way that I viewed the world and the way that I look at things, especially when it comes to those things inside my comfort zone. You're going to hear us talking about that today and so much more. Let's get to this episode with Alex Hutchinson. Alex, welcome back to the Running for Real podcast. I'm excited you're back here. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Tina. I'm thrilled to be back, and it's been far too long.
I know, it has. We did talk for a few minutes before, and we were going over the fact that we think we last talked around the pandemic and how 5 years have somehow almost passed since that time, and it just feels like a weird haze that we can't really quite get our hands on of what that time was. However, the last time you came out with a book and I would have interviewed you about it was 2018, which is even thinking about that, like before the pandemic. And most authors tend to already be thinking about the next book before they've even, while they're usually promoting and publicizing the previous book. So Endure in 2018, and we are now in 2025. So I thought maybe you could share, just as it has been a while since you've been back on the podcast, why 7 years between one book to the other? Not typical path for an author there.
Yes, the unspoken question in the mind of my agent, my wife, and everybody else. It was not the plan, and this is not career advice to be emulated. Like, hey, if you have a successful book, wait 7 years so everyone forgets who the heck you are. But the question, I mean, the answer to the question is a little bit meta, and it kind of, in the sense that what my new book is about and exploring and is venturing into new pastures is the question that I was grappling with after Endure. So Endure, just for your listeners, I wrote a book called Endure in 2018 that came out in 2018, which was really about how we push the limits of our endurance, or what defines our limits. And that was a topic I'd been working on as a reporter or as a journalist for about 10 years. It was a topic that's really close to my heart, something I was very passionate about and really interested in for its own sake, not just because I wanted to write a book about it. And the book did unexpectedly well. It sold copies. It really helped my career. And so the standard advice would be like, okay, you better get Endure 2 on the books, like down the pipeline within the next 2 years or something like that. But I really wrestled with, I had, a lot of passion went into writing Endure, and it wasn't something that I had to force myself to do. I was fascinated by it. And just sort of going through the cookie cutter approach of saying, okay, well, what else do I have to say about endurance? Did not fill me with the same interest. And I started to kind of wonder why. Why can't I just settle it? This is what I wanted. This is what I was dreaming for. Why is it that I want to try something different? And that grew into a sort of investigation of trying to understand how these motivations work. But it turned out to be a big topic, and one that took more years than I expected to get any sort of insights about.
Okay, so then with that, when you were doing the media tour, as I said, most authors tend to already be thinking about the next one as they're promoting the one coming out. You said you were wrestling with it. Were you even wrestling with it during that time, or did you think you had some concepts at that time when you were promoting the book, like, oh, maybe this could be what the second is? Or even at that early point, were you still grappling with, I don't know if I can make this into a second book, or if it feels right to do a second book?
Even by the time the Endure was done and in, being published, I felt like I'd said everything I had to say at that point in my life about endurance. I felt like I wasn't even sure I could carry on as a journalist in that area, let alone write another book about it. So I was, which is not to say that there aren't new things, and I still do find new things to write about related to endurance, but I really felt like I had done my best to say everything I can, or say everything I could, and that to go back would be just kind of exploitative is not quite the right word, but I would just be kind of like trying to say, well, if you like this book, maybe I'd be doing it because of the idea that it would be successful and make money, as opposed to the idea that I would be fascinated and curious and following my own interests. And I will say, not to wander way off the track, but I had a really important experience when I started out in journalism. My first job was at a daily newspaper called the Ottawa Citizen, and I was a general assignment reporter, so I wrote about a whole bunch of different things. That was a great opportunity. I wrote hundreds of stories about different topics, and towards the end of my time there, I wrote a profile of the Kenyan runner who was coming to town for the Ottawa Marathon, who had won it a couple times in a row. And so I wanted to share with readers, like, who is this guy who's been traveling the world running like third tier marathons for a few $100 or $1,000? What is his life like? Why is he here? And so I wrote a big piece about that. And everyone at the newspaper was like, oh my God, Alex, we didn't realize you could actually write, because all of a sudden my passion was showing, because it was something I was interested in naturally, not something I'd been assigned to do. And that lesson has stayed with me. I've really tried to bear in mind that I think my best work will be when I'm interested in what I'm doing, when I'm passionate in what I'm doing, not when I'm going through the motions to do what I think other people expect me to do. So that was on my mind when Endure came out already, as I was going around and talking about it, which was a lot of fun. But I was already thinking, I don't feel the draw to write, 7 more tips about endurance.
So did you speak to other authors about this, what you were feeling? I have to wonder if, I'm kind of known in the space for being very real and vulnerable in a way that like disarms people. And sometimes when I say things, I can tell that it's hitting a nerve in them, and that they feel that too, but no one has ever spoken the words before. And it feels like an alien concept. Were other authors saying a similar thing, or were you met with, oh, well, I didn't have that problem?
There's definitely a real mix. I have a lot of friends who are like, they've written a book and it's like, okay, the book's coming out next month, but they've already literally, I have friends who've already signed their next contract before the book comes out and are thinking about the one after that. And I'm like, okay, like you're wired differently. You have different things to say. Your ideas come from different places. But I also found people who reflected those experiences and made me think that it wasn't such a crazy thing to experience. And I'm a little cautious of like calling people out, but
sure.
David Epstein is a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
And we had some really good conversations about, he wrote The Sports Gene, and I think it was 2013 that did really well, unexpectedly well. And he was the one who said to me, like, after that book came out, he had a chat with his agent, and he said he wasn't sure what he wanted to do, wasn't sure if he wanted to write another book, blah, blah, blah. And his agent said, look, you can do whatever you want. You can go wherever you want. Just the one thing to bear in mind is don't let it be 5 years till your next book comes out. And I think Range, his next book, came out like 6 years later. So he ignored, he was not able to adhere to this advice either, in the sense that when he writes a book, he puts everything he has into it. And when he's finished, I think this was the case after Range too. His feeling was like, okay, well, I wrote that book, and I'm never going to write another book again until the idea comes. And so he's been someone. David has been someone whose career I respect enormously, and whose approach to the work I really try to emulate, because I think he really brings his whole kind of intellectual curiosity to every topic he writes about.
Yeah,
and so he was patient about it. He was honest about the fact that, he doesn't finish a book and is like, all right, let's do the next one. This was so much fun. So that helped to normalize it for me.
That's good. Did he teach you some dancing skills as well?
Is he a killer dancer?
Oh yeah, like he puts it. Oh yeah. Well, on video, he puts videos on Instagram. I think it's more of kind of a.
Oh, he mentioned he's taking dancing lessons right now.
He does like kind of a very. I wouldn't even know the term of style of dancing he does, but kind of like moonwalk-esque.
Oh my God!
Dancing,
I've got to get on Instagram.
He's really good at it. Yeah. So I encourage. I'll put a link in the show notes. Although I'm embarrassing him now, so sorry.
Hey, if it's on Instagram,
he's putting it on the internet.
He's looking for it.
Okay, all right. And thank you for sharing that, because I think that people listening may not be able to say, well, I have a book situation like that, but I do have something else in my life that feels like everyone else is doing this, and I'm not following that path. So appreciate that. Now, you start the book, The Explorer's Gene: Why We Seek Big Challenges, New Flavors, and the Blank Spots on the Map, with this adventure you were on with your family. And first, I want to be mad at you and say, way to make the rest of us feel bad for not taking our children on wilderness adventures of where they learn like who they are at a young age. So first, I want to be mad at you, because I was like, oh, come on. Like, now I have to, that's something that's been in the back of my mind, and I just haven't even taken a single step towards it. So tell me all your secrets of how you manage that.
It's being willing to let your kids hate you. No, it's a look. The reason Lauren, my wife, and I take our kids on adventures is because that's what we love to do and what we used to do. So we're not going out and looking for character building opportunities for the kids. We're just wanting to do the things that we love and hoping that our kids will share them. But it's a real, as I discuss a little in the book, it's a real challenge to think carefully about what's appropriate for kids, both from a safety perspective, but from a just dealing with challenge and discomfort. Like, we're adults, we're making our own choices, but we're imposing them on our kids. So it's something we wrestle with every year, and we're wrestling with again for this summer's plans about what's appropriate, what the kids can handle, what they really want, and stuff like that. So not a simple thing by any stretch, I would say.
Good. Yeah. I will say I've shared this often, but my aunt used to take me on, I actually don't know the miles. I think it was maybe 4 or 5 mile walks when I was probably around your kids' age, 6 to 10, somewhere in there. And at the time, I have these memories of being out in the English countryside of like, we've been out here forever. But now I look back and I'm like, I cannot thank her enough for what she did there, because she taught me about being outside and being in nature, and the like accomplishment you get from finishing and seeing the end, seeing the house again. So, there's so many instances like that where your kids in the moment might just be complaining the whole way. And I'm sure I was, but it's building that bigger foundation that someday as an adult, as I do now, I'm grateful for. So,
yeah, I mean, it's a whole bunch of parenting, right? Is the sense of, I know you don't appreciate this now, whether it's eating broccoli or going on long hikes. It's my judgment of what I think is best for you, and of course, I can still remember being a kid and being like, I don't care what you think is best for me 20 years from now. I want to eat the candy. So it is tricky. But the other thing I would say is like, I didn't do a lot of camping or hiking when I was a kid. I do have a couple of memories similar to you. I had an aunt and uncle who took me on hikes, and including they took me on an overnight hike in the Appalachian Mountains, where you stay in a hut at the top of the mountain. And it was a complete fiasco. It was torrential rain like I've never experienced. And there was some guy in these huts you sleep with, in a room with 40 other people, and there were people snoring at a level that I had never encountered before. So I got no sleep. So at the time it was like, it was awful. But it's like one of the most vivid memories of my childhood. I think I was 7 years old, and I ask me what happened when I was 7. There's not many things I can remember, and that is one of them. And so I keep that in mind, that it's like, as we know, as runners, it's like sometimes the most challenging experiences are the most sort of vivid and memorable and satisfying. But again, you don't necessarily want to make that choice when you're 8 years old.
No, although that's interesting you said about the snoring being what kept you up, because if I think about staying overnight on the Appalachian trails, being kept awake by snoring is not what I would have imagined you were kept awake by. But you think of like rustling in the woods, or some kind of creaking trees. Not snoring, but that's the reality of us as humans, isn't it?
It really is.
Okay, so on that note of children, you talk in the book a lot about how children tend to explore the world. Mostly adults tend to exploit. You spend a lot of time explaining about this explore, exploit kind of spectrum that we tend to move our way along, how much we spend time in each, about humans are kind of born to explore. And I'd like to begin with the kind of main questions here of, that concept. Humans are born to explore, but we live in a world that focuses on exploiting. The work that we do and the errands that we run and the life in 2025 is involved around exploiting our knowledge to kind of efficiency, ultimately. So maybe explain that concept for someone who may not have thought about that before.
Yeah. So, I guess the first thing I would say is, when I first started to imagine the seeds of this book, and I was feeling kind of constrained, going along the path that others expected of me, I imagined a book as sort of the case for exploring, that why we should explore more, what's so wonderful about exploring. And one of the kind of not U-turns, but one of the ways in which the topic got richer and more complex for me was realizing that actually exploring it's not always the right thing to do to explore. That you can think of it in terms of this dichotomy, as you pointed out, between exploring and exploiting, which is terminology that was made popular by a guy named James March, who was a Stanford business prof back in the early 90s, talking about corporations. Do you explore or exploit? So if you're exploiting, it's like, okay, I'm a company that makes widgets. I'm going to invest more money in making the widgets slightly better and in marketing the widgets and trying to sell more widgets. Or are you going to explore? You're going to say, maybe we can invent something completely different that will make our widgets obsolete and make us even more money. But it's going to take time and resources, and it's uncertain whether we'll be able to invent something. So the other way of thinking about exploring and exploiting is, you go to a restaurant, you go to your favorite restaurant. Do you order the same dish that you always order because you know it's good and you know you like it? Or do you order the special, which you don't know? Maybe it's going to be amazing. Maybe it's going to blow your mind, or maybe it's going to be just not interesting to you. And so it's like, do you take the known good outcome or the uncertain outcome, which might be better but might be worse? And this is so, as those two examples show, like corporate strategy, ordering in a restaurant. This is a situation that recurs on every scale throughout our lives, from the minute decisions to the big tactical decisions of like, do I marry this person or do we break up or whatever? And so what I realized is just saying, oh, you need to explore more. On its own, that advice is like, no, never get married, because who knows, maybe you'll meet someone even better next week. So no, never choose a career. Keep on, you have to, it's not about exploring is the best thing in the world. It's about a balance between exploring and exploiting. But I would say, as you sort of hinted at, I think there's a lot of forces that are pushing us towards exploitation, especially as we get older. The older we get, into a narrower and narrower track, and we maybe are undervaluing exploration.
Yes. And I do want to get into towards the end here about, knowing when to stop exploring, when we can pause, talking about, the hedonic treadmill of this next that we might kind of get into if we are leaning too far on the exploring end. But I do want to go down the other direction first. With regards to restaurants, I found it fascinating that you talked about this uncertainty sweet spot, like you mentioned there, about choosing a meal that you at a restaurant you love that you may or may not like. But you also talked about how we tend to, if if I understood this correct, we tend to select restaurants that maybe have good reviews, but if there's too many reviews, we kind of lose interest in that restaurant because now the uncertainty, the excitement of it is gone. Can you explain that? Because I found that fascinating.
Yeah, me too. This was really interesting. So maybe as background to that, to say, why is it we explore? We want to, and fundamentally, without going down too far down this rabbit hole, we explore to learn about the world, and the way our brains seem to be wired for that purpose is that we pursue areas of uncertainty. It's like the thing we know least about is the richest opportunity for us to learn about the world, and for us to survive as a species or as an organism or whatever. The more we can learn about the world, the fewer surprises are going to spring at us from behind a rock. So we're drawn towards areas of uncertainty. But again, as you say, it's not that we just want to know. We go to things we know absolutely the least about, because some things are so uncertain that we can't learn anything about the world. So, I mean, if I'm in the library, if I pick a book that I've already read, I'm not going to learn anything new about it. It's not all that interesting. There's not much uncertainty. But if I pick a book that's written in Lithuanian or something like that, I don't speak Lithuanian. So there's a lot of uncertainty. There's so much I don't know about this book. But just because, even if it's the most uncertain thing in the library, I'm not going to learn anything from reading a book in a language I don't understand. Mm-hmm. So there's a sweet spot of uncertainty where it's like, I don't know what's going on here, but I know enough that by choosing this path, I'm going to be able to learn something about the world. So there's the intermediate spot. So, and this, as you said, this takes place in restaurants. It's like, there's this a really cool study that I wrote about where they took ordering data from Deliveroo, which is a food delivery company, from like 1.8 million orders. So to really look at, okay, moving beyond the cliche of what do you order, how do people actually do this in real life? And as you said, what they found is if you look at a restaurant and it's got like 0 reviews or 2 reviews, you're like, I don't know, this could be pretty dodgy. Maybe I'm not going to go for that. But again, if you look at a review and it's got 50,000 reviews and it says that's a 3.9 star restaurant, then you're like, I'm pretty sure that's a 3.9 star restaurant. It might be 3.8 or it might be 4.0, but it's definitely not a 5-star restaurant because thousands of people have tried it and on average, they don't think it's a 5-star restaurant. So there's an intermediate point where you know you know something about it, not too much, but not too little either, where it's that sweet spot of sweet spot of uncertainty, which is pointing to an opportunity to actually learn, to discover new patterns in the world.
Yeah, so interesting. And with that, I want to dig deeper in here with this topic of this exploring, but also, the reducing uncertainty, learning about the world. You talked about, when we explore more, we make errors, we pay attention more, and that stimulates our hippocampus. There were some really interesting things that you shared about with the stimulating our hippocampus and therefore not stimulating our hippocampus with some of the ways that we live right now. Can you share about the loss in fitness that accompanies aging is a result of changes in exercise, not aging itself, and how the smaller hippocampus from it not being stimulated as much is then related to aging, meaning that people develop these serious health conditions. So sorry, I just threw a lot of information there, but you get what I'm trying to say, that like this hippocampus stimulation is actually really harming us later in life.
Yeah, so I think I've got the question.
It wasn't really a question.
let me throw it back at you in terms of what I'm thinking. So first of all, you mentioned the fitness decline, and I think as a comparison, and I think that's a good way to into this, which is as we get older, we become less fit. And as a runner, I can look at my 5K times, and I'm like, yeah, I am demonstrably less fit than I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15, and so on. And so the big question that people always ask is like, is this because I'm training less? I mean, I've got kids, I've got work responsibilities. I just don't train as hard as I used to. Or is it because I've gotten older and because my body is falling apart, because my body is not working as well? I go slower and I train less. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do we get old because we train less, or do we get slower because we train less, or do we train less because we've gotten slower and creakier? And there was a pretty good analysis. I mean, these are hard questions to answer, but there was an analysis from some researchers in Switzerland a couple of years ago that really tried to tease out the nature versus nurture of age-related decline. And their conclusion was, as you can probably guess or predict, was it's about 50-50, give or take. That some of the age-related decline is like, it doesn't matter how hard you train, you're gonna be getting slower. But about half of it on average is that, yeah, you're just not, when you're 50, you're not spending as much time moving, being active, training in many ways as you were when you were 20. And that's why. So you lose function because you're not using it as much, in addition to sort of natural decline. Now you can make the trajectory of exploring and exploiting. There's a similar sort of conundrum there, which is that when you're a kid, you explore a lot. We seem to be wired to, as any parent knows, your kids really want to know what's in that cupboard or what's behind that door.
What does it sound like? What if I drop this off the stairs?
What would happen if I put painted nail polish on the new windows, as my daughter tried to find out this morning, much to my pleasure. Anyway, as you get older, you explore less. And so there's a couple questions here. Is this smart? Is this the right thing to do? Is it hardwired in us? Can we fight against it? And so the first question, is it smart? It's like, yes, to some extent, because we know a lot more about the world. So we don't need to waste time discovering what happens when you paint nail polish on the window. I already know what happens. Even if I've never done it, I have enough experience of the world to know that bad things happen. Very bad things happen. And so I don't need to explore as much because I can exploit the knowledge I already have. And this is a sort of universal pattern of exploring and exploiting, that the longer you have, the more it makes sense to keep exploring. So music is another example. People tend, the music that people listen to, people tend to be most active in seeking new music when they're, 18, 19, 20, 21.
Yeah, this was fascinating.
Part of this is social, like, you're out there experiencing the world. But part of it is like, if you find good music, you've got 50 years to enjoy that amazing music. Now, I turned 50 this year, and it's like, if I discover a new band, I'm only going to just enjoy it for another 20 years, right? Or I don't know, like whatever. Hopefully I've got many more years. But the point is, you have a shorter horizon to enjoy new things. So the value of exploring gets lower and lower. And you can take that to an extreme. If we go back to the restaurant example, if you're changing planes in a city and you've got 4 hours there and you need to grab a meal in the airport, and you can pick like the big chain restaurant that you're familiar with, that's okay. Or you can try some local option that you don't know anything about. Well, there's no benefit to learning whether this local option is amazing, because you're never going to come back to this city. So you maybe don't get me wrong. There's some pleasure in discovering new things. I see, for those you're listening, I see Tina's face, just like, what is this guy talking about? How can
you just picked the wrong example for me, because chain restaurants are not my jam, but small local restaurants, I like supporting local business. But you picked the wrong person to give that example.
Okay, so I take your point, but the relative value. Whereas if you just move to that city, if you're going to be there for a month in an Airbnb, or if you've moved there, then trying the lesser known option has more value, because if it turns out to be good, you're going to come back there every Friday night.
Yeah.
So all of which is to say, it makes sense to explore less as you get older. But the question is, do we overcompensate? So as I sit here at my desk, preparing to write articles on the same topic that I've been writing about for years, and going to the shopping at the same shops that I've been shopping at for years, blah, blah, blah. Am I missing out chances to discover new things that would make my life better? And there aren't any simple answers to this, but two things. One is when I talk to scientists who study like the explore exploit dilemma, and there's a lot of them who study this. One of the things people said is our lives are longer and more different now. Like, we don't just age by, necessarily moving back in with our kids and sitting in a rocking chair in front of the fire and spending our last 20 years like that. We're moving around, we're navigating new technology, which is different, and we may still be exploring and active into our 80s and beyond. And so there's value to still exploring when you're 60 and 70 and discovering new things that may not have been wired into us evolutionarily, 1.5 million years ago or whatever.
Yes.
And the other thing is, if you look at explore, exploit, if you test explore, exploit behavior in people at different age groups, you can see that as you get older, you explore less. And that's not always a bad thing. That in these, you can test explore, exploit behavior with these sort of gambling games or simulated things where you choose options. And older people actually do very well because their exploiting gets better. They're better at using the knowledge they gain to take advantage of it. So that's good. But there's a subset of people. In one study, it was about 20% of people, of older people, who really overcompensated and stopped exploring. And that's a problem. So if you're someone who never takes a risk or tries something new, then you're probably missing out on some opportunities to discover new and valuable things.
Friends, the days are getting longer. I am so excited that we are coming into spring. You can just feel it in the air. And that means that when I stumble down the stairs groggily to go get my AG1, I drink it first thing in the morning. I'm not standing there in the darkness, and I love that. It helps me to say goodbye to that grogginess and fully embrace the brighter morning. AG1 has such a great taste that sets the tone for a longer, productive, and energized day for me. Unlike other supplements that come and go, AG1 is a habit that actually sticks. I've been doing it for 5 years now because you can feel the difference. I have noticed that I have more energy. I feel like my body is functioning better. I really do notice it when I miss or forget to take it on a few days of a trip. When it's gone from my regimen for more than about 5 days, I really start to notice the difference. And that is why I've been using it for 5 years. So when it comes to my health, I want something I can trust. And that's why I chose AG1. With science-backed ingredients and real benefits that I can feel, AG1 makes it easy to support overall wellness every day. And that's why I've been partnering with them for 6 years now. And AG1 is offering new subscribers a free $76 gift when you sign up. You'll get a welcome kit, a bottle of D3K2, and 5 free travel packs with your first box. So make sure you check out drinkag1.com/Tina to get this offer. That's drinkag1.com/Tina to start your new year on a healthier note. Yeah, and I think there's a few different ways we could go with this. Missing out on those opportunities, and also
the hippocampus. I didn't answer your question about the hippocampus. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Go for that first, and then
so let me quickly say that so we store memories in our hippocampus. We store spatial knowledge in our hippocampus, and so one of the hallmarks of this trajectory towards less exploring is that our hippocampus get smaller. But the problem is, smaller hippocampus is associated with a lot of bad things. It's associated with risk of Alzheimer's, risk of depression, vulnerability to PTSD. It's a bad thing. And so the thing is, if you don't make an effort to use your hippocampus in the same way that we make an effort to use our bodies to exercise them, so that our muscles don't atrophy, your hippocampus, there's pretty reliable evidence that your hippocampus, the rate of shrinkage depends on how you use it. So if you are an all GPS person who never pays attention to where they are in space and never sort of looking around trying to figure out where you're going, because that stimulates your hippocampus, then there's a plausible argument to say that you're probably contributing to, or you're allowing your hippocampus to atrophy, which has some serious health effects. Sorry, yes. that was the whole payoff of the whole discussion, and I forgot.
If I'd actually asked you a coherent question, then maybe you would have been able to follow it through, but I did not. But I want to, at this point then, with what you just shared there, that is quite a scary thing to think about. A lot of these health conditions hang over our heads as like, oh, I really don't want to have that be me someday, or someone I care about, someone I love. And there you've just kind of given us a way to lower our risk of those things. But if you said to someone who was in that 20% or did lean very heavily on exploit, you said you need to explore more. They're going to say, I don't want to go to India and just, go explore around there. But it doesn't have to be that. You did mention about music there, which I could easily go down the music rabbit hole. I find that so fascinating that we tend to get stuck. That chunk of time you said, kind of late teens to college age is, I've read a few things about that's where our brains tend to like to be. And it's kind of a comforting time, the music we find there. So it could be something as simple as music or trying new restaurants, trying things like that. So can you maybe share for that reason that when you say explore, you've kind of explained some of it during this episode so far. You're not necessarily talking about, hiking the Appalachian Trail, going through the Grand Canyon. It doesn't have to be these big things, but you can find little areas to explore within your own life from where you are at.
Yeah, that's a super important point. And whenever I'm talking to people and I sort of make the overly broad claim that, humans are wired to explore, there is always someone who will say, you may be, but I'm not. And the truth is that there's a range of exploratory behavior among people. Some people are really like restless. There's genes that are associated with this, and the sort of extreme end of it would be ADHD. That's kind of an extreme phenotype of needing to explore all the time. And others are much happier, following in paths that they're familiar with. But even with no matter where you are on that spectrum, we all explore and exploit in different ways in different parts of our lives. And it doesn't have to be physical. It can be intellectual exploration, aesthetic exploration. What's important is and this is a topic that maybe we'll get into. There's a difference between active and passive exploration. And what I would argue, at least, is that exploring actively, and actively not in the sense of getting up and going and climbing Everest, but actively in the sense of following your own interests, of choosing what you're going to pursue, as opposed to just kind of turning on the TV and letting, or logging into social media and going where the algorithm sends you. Because you could argue that actually social media is a great exploration tool. It's going to expose you to a whole bunch of things that you didn't expect. You're going to learn all these things. The problem is you're not choosing in many ways. You're not taking a strong active role in choosing what to explore. You're just being spoon-fed it. And there's some really interesting research that suggests that our brains respond differently, even if it's the same information presented. If you choose to follow, a given path, or follow your interests, follow your curiosity, to go somewhere, or do something, or read about something. If you take exactly that information you're exposed to in your exploration and you show it, you share it with somebody else, but they're just being shown it passively. They didn't choose; they're just being given what you chose to explore. The two of you will have very different experiences. Your brains will assimilate that information differently. You will get benefits from having followed your curiosity, because your brain is the one that's deciding what is the uncertainty sweet spot for me. Where is it that I have an opportunity to learn something about the world? And so if you feed the same information to someone else, that may not be in their uncertainty sweet spot. And the brain being fed information passively is not rewiring itself in the same way. So it's definitely not this is not a call that for everyone to go sign up for a hike to the North Pole or whatever. It's a call to follow your curiosity and to actively to choose to pursue the things that interest you, as opposed to just kind of floating along on the stream of what society is throwing at you.
Yeah, one of the things that came to mind when I was reading, but also when you were talking there, was how, you talk about being fed information rather than seeking information. And social media, but just the internet in general, has taken away that satisfying feeling of when you are, what was the name of that actor who, was in that movie? What was the name? And you sit there and it's kind of in the back of your mind, like noodling on it. And then you suddenly, oh yeah, it's this. Whereas now we have this ability to just look it up, and that takes away, for me at least, that takes away that kind of joy of remembering it and using my brain. But also I think about the weather, right? How we, rather than step outside the door and feel what it feels like outside, we turn to our phone and get that information of, this is what the temperature is, therefore I will wear this. Yeah.
I'm looking over to my right now because I have a book that I got for Christmas from my sister-in-law called The Lost Art of Reading Nature's Signs. And I haven't started even reading it yet, but it's exactly, I mean, the reason I'm interested in it is exactly what you said, because I'm exactly like that. I wake up in the morning and I call up my weather app to figure out what I should wear for my run. And, and then I go downstairs and I check the weather again just to make sure it hasn't changed in the, 5 minutes since then. And if we're sitting at the dinner table, and a topic comes up, and it's like, who was that actor? I just pull out my phone, even though I'm like, no phones at the dinner table. I'm not, we're not looking at our phones, but then it's like, oh, well, I do need to look this up. So these are very hard, impulses to resist. And it's not like we should never, weather apps are great, but it is true that when you're looking at the weather app, you're not looking out the window and understanding what different clouds look like and what that suggests about what's going to happen. And, looking at the trees and seeing how windy it looks, you're just being fed a number. And so, less, you notice less about, so that, this is something I talk about a little bit in the book about the difference between two trips, one of which got hard enough that I needed to rely on GPS navigation because we couldn't afford any wrong turns. And that was, I'm glad I had GPS there so we didn't die in the Newfoundland wilderness. But then on a subsequent trip, I really made a big effort to navigate by paper map. And just realizing how much it forced me to look around, to not just say, okay, my phone says we need to be going a little bit to the left compared to the way we're walking, so let's take that trail to the left. It's like, okay, we're trying to head to that valley there. There's a river that should be to the left of it, and there should be a peak that's kind of high, but not as high as that other one. So let's look at all these peaks. And so all of a sudden you're noticing the world around you, and your hippocampus is encoding all of this. So, I mean, I don't mean to reduce it to the experience of like, oh, I really need to exercise my hippocampus. It's like, now I'm seeing the glacier and I'm seeing the trail, and I'm really present, which is, obviously a cliche, but I really felt that way.
For sure. And it makes me think about you and I both being people who would have known a life without phones prior to this world now. And I have multiple, primarily in my hometown in England, but also just through my running, which we'll get to in a minute. I have certain routes back from places where I know the map is going to say this way, but actually this way is quicker because you skip this stoplight, or because this happens, or it tends to be a nicer drive or whatever. But you have these paths that you explored and found and took, and it ends up being better than what the map says. But then, I was very aware reading this that I always do default to the map, even if it is somewhere that I'm like, okay, well, that is in this area, so I could figure it out easily and explore my way there, but I don't. And that has definitely got me thinking of, I need to do more of that in particular, of, not just blindly following the map, but actually finding my own way there. But we all have our own versions of this that we've explored, primarily through running, for those of us listening.
So look, I was taking my kids last night to a hockey game, and I got lost. I lost is maybe a strong word. I missed a turn and ended up taking a little detour. And so my kids were like, "Mommy uses Waze. If you had used Waze, you wouldn't have gotten lost." And I'm like, I'm not lost. We just missed a turn. It's like, but you wouldn't have missed the turn if you'd used Waze. Mommy uses Waze. But, and so look, there are costs to, so, because one of the changes that I have made after researching this book, and there's a researcher in Montreal named Véronique Bobo, who's, does a lot of work on hippocampus and navigation and long-term health. And she's a realist. She's like, look, it's not that you should never use GPS. Of course, it's a very useful tool, but you can think about ways to use it that support your spatial thinking. And so, for example, she says, keep it on the bird's eye view if you can. So, you want to figure out where to go, type in the directions. It'll show you a bird's eye, like a map view of the route you're going to take. Then if you want, you can then say, like, take me there. And then it shifts into a first person, what's called an egocentric view, where you're seeing what you see out the windshield. And if you follow that egocentric view, you really don't develop any sense of where you're going. You're just following turn by turn, and you don't have a big picture view of where you're going. If you keep it in the overhead view, the map view, then you do have a sense of like, okay, it's telling me to go here, but for some reason it's telling me to go up this parallel street. Whereas, I know I could go this other way and it's going to be quieter and have less traffic. So I'm going to, or you can make your own choices, or you can just stop paying attention because now you've seen the route and you're like, oh, I just need to go north until I get to Eglinton. At Eglinton, I need to go west for a little while. And then first turn after Kiel is when when I'll arrive at the place or whatever. So it actually teaches you where you're going so you can do reproducible. So I will, if I think I know where I'm going, I will maybe check before I leave, and then I'll close the map, and then I'll drive. And if I start getting uncertain, I'll open the map on my car screen, but I'll keep it on bird's eye. And then if I'm really like, oh, I can't tell, am I supposed to turn at this exit or the one that's 30 meters beyond? I'll switch to ecocentric so I can see for sure. But it's a question of using as much as I need to avoid these situations where my kids are like, mommy uses Waze. But not just defaulting so that I remove all need for me to use my brain or to think or to understand where I'm going. And this is like, I'm living in the same house, the same neighborhood that I grew up in. So I have a lot of these situations you're describing where it's like, I've driven to the airport by this route, for 40 years. It's telling me to go this other way. Should I try it? And, sometimes it's better. Like computers know stuff. Like they're not, they can be good, but sometimes it's not better. Sometimes it's like, oh, there's a reason I kept going this other way because it's so much calmer and quieter and more relaxed. And so anyway, it's tricky.
It's so interesting. Yeah. And thank you for sharing that, because I think that's a good example of a way that we can all kind of challenge ourselves a little bit and explore a little bit, but not in a way that is going to, you're not going to do that when you're on a tight time crunch and you've got to get to this place by this time. But just, if you go into a coffee shop or you're just, on a Saturday morning and you haven't got much to do, like, why not? So
yeah, missing a turn for the most part, it's not a big deal. Like it's whatever, you'll catch the next turn. It's
I am
okay.
glad your kids say that, because that helps me feel better, because mine would absolutely be making a comment of like, why aren't we there yet? So I'm glad that you haven't figured everything out in this sense with your kids. So then let's bring running in here. You talked about exercise being this expansive, exploratory frame of mind. I'm sure that's what many of the runners listening have been thinking about as you've been talking here. How much are runners kind of, this is the wrong phrase, but like off the hook in terms of, well, we do our exploring, we explore through running?
Yeah. So I let me answer that by saying the seeds of this book, the early seeds of this book go back to something I was thinking about 10 years ago. I was thinking about Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. Mm-hmm. This idea that there's this archetypal story of going on an adventure, facing a struggle and coming back, and thinking about how every run kind of follows that template a little bit, whether it's a marathon or an ultra marathon or just going out for a jog, that we're struggling, thinking, I don't want to go anywhere. I don't want to go. I'm comfortable here. You go outside, you face the challenge, and you come back changed with something, with an improved frame of mind, or you've come back better than you left. And I really thought, and I started to think about exploring and thinking that really running it's both a metaphor for exploring, or exploring is a metaphor for running, but it's also just, it follows that template and gives us it in this modern world where we're not going to sail across the Atlantic for the most part, or do whatever these, there's not new lands to discover, but we are discovering ourselves or discovering things in a lot of ways. So there's both the physical dimension of it. You go to a new city, you're staying in a hotel, and I can't count the number of runners who have said to me, or who have said something along the lines of, I love, I learn new cities by going for the run, and particularly not by following, because you explore, you're like, oh, I don't know, you look at a map and you're like, okay, there's a park about 8 blocks that way. I'm going to try and get to that park and do a loop around that park. And then you discover you can't get 4 blocks. You have to make a left turn because there's a dead end or whatever. And so you end up exploring in ways you didn't expect. But one of the most interesting things that one of the scientists I interviewed said, because I was asking, like, why do we do hard things, right? Like, why do I not go in the wilderness and climb a mountain or run a marathon? And he was saying, well, we're all going back to this idea that we're all seeking to resolve uncertainty, to learn about the world. And he said, one of the things is that we're not born with knowledge of our capabilities. You can only find them out by going out and doing things. And so we're in a sense exploring our own capacities when we choose to run, that we're saying, can I finish this ultra marathon? But also, can I get up at 5:30 on a Tuesday morning and get my run in before work? And can I do this and feel good about it and push my body in a way that I'm hoping to push? So I really think running is both a physical form of exploration, but also an internal form of exploration. Does that mean we're off the hook in all other aspects of our life? No, in the same sense that it doesn't mean you should just sit at your desk chair or your couch for the other 23 hours of the day. Like, we're not fully off the hook, but we've got a pretty good head start, I think.
Yes. I love that. And you also, you mentioned there about the hero's journey. Related to that, you spoke about how the modern day adventurer narrative is actually different to what we are shown or what we are told in that way of, it's not that someone says, I'm going to go to here because I'm trying to think. Because I need to explore this new place. But we start with this desire, this urge to go explore something, and then we reverse engineer a way to justify it. I found that fascinating, and I think that definitely applies to runners in many ways. So share that.
Yeah. I guess in part what I was thinking about there is there are a lot of people who do amazing. So what is a modern day explorer? There are people who do amazing, I'm going to pogo stick across Antarctica and I mean, I'm being facetious, but people do amazing things and go amazing places and do it in amazing ways. These days, a lot of those missions it's like, I want to raise awareness about the shortage of pogo sticks in Antarctica. So I'm going to go on this pogo stick mission across Antarctica. I'm raising money to buy pogo sticks for Antarctica or whatever. And I think it's important to understand that very few people wake up thinking, and I'll stop talking about pogo sticks. That's a stupid example, but people want to go on these adventures, and then they're finding a way of making it both financially feasible and sort of socially acceptable to be doing these things. And I understand that. That's, like, we all struggle with what I want to do and how does this fit into societal expectations. But I think why this is interesting is that it fits into a broader kind of framework of thinking about going on adventures for a goal to reach the Holy Grail versus going on an adventure to be on an adventure. And there's a long sort of history. Alfred Hitchcock famously talked about MacGuffins. So all of his movies, there'd be something that everyone was pursuing, but in reality, in his view at least, the something that they were pursuing, where the Maltese Falcon or whatever it is that they're trying to figure out, it's irrelevant. What people want to watch is the pursuit, and as long as the characters behave in a way as though this goal, this Holy Grail, is worth achieving, it doesn't really matter what the Grail is. What matters is the adventures we have en route. And there's this whole, you can trace this back into like the literal quest for the Holy Grail. It's like, what happens? There's a prophecy that one guy is going to find the Holy Grail, but yet all of the knights go off looking for the Holy Grail, even though they've already basically been told that they're going to fail, because being on the quest is what's exciting. Yeah. Being on the quest is what's interesting, not finding the thing. And I think this is, to me, probably the most useful thing running can teach us, because if anyone has raced over a period of time, then they've set goals for themselves, and they've had the experience of missing those goals, and they've had the experience of hitting those goals. And what my accumulated, what I would say based on my accumulated running wisdom is that there's not a big difference between those two things. It feels good to hit those goals for sure, as long as your goals aren't like totally like delusional. Yeah, sometimes you hit them, sometimes you miss them. Some of the greatest races I have ever run, some of the ones I'm most proud of, are ones where I've missed my goal, but I gave everything. Conversely, I was lucky enough to achieve some times or some places, run some races that were better than anything I had ever dared to imagine. And it felt really good for a day or two. And then you realize, okay, well, I did that. I bet I can do better. I bet I can do something more. This is like the universal experience of running, that whatever time you run, whatever performance you achieve, you immediately start thinking about it. I wonder if I could do a little better, go a little faster. I don't know if I've ever met a runner who is like, this was my best time, and that was the best possible time I could ever have run. There was no way in possible that I could have run 1 second faster. Nobody thinks that way. And so if you stop thinking about, so you might say, well, then the time doesn't matter. We don't need to worry about striving for these goals. But that's not true either, right? Like, because if you take away the goals, some people run just for fitness, that's fine. But if you're in a racing mindset, if you just don't care what your achievement is, then the pursuit kind of loses its meaning, and you lose and motivation. So it's this tricky balance of saying, I'm going to try as hard as I can for this goal, and maybe I'll make it, and maybe I won't. And either way, as long as I've, I'm into sports coach cliches here, but it's a really important truth. I think that the pursuit of the goal is what matters, and the Holy Grail is not going to change your life.
But also one of those things you have to learn for yourself, because I'm sure interviewing Steve Magnus for his book Win the Inside Game, we were talking about how lessons, you learn lessons at a point that you're willing and able to accept and understand them, versus being, you or I saying it's not about the end point, it's not about the goal. You have to, it doesn't matter if we say that, you have to understand it yourself.
And these things these words that I just spoke are the types of words that 20 years ago, someone could speak them to me and I'd be like, yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks, buddy. Thanks, Grandpa. And now they come out of my mouth and I'm like, man, this is deep. This is such wisdom, but it's, and the difference is the lived experience of having done it. And so I guess what we can
exploiting you.
Yeah. What we can both really recommend is get out there and experience these things, dream big and take chances. And then if you don't recognize the wisdom of our words now, you will. It's by
at some point. So to finish here with a final question related to this, when to know it is the right time to stop exploring, to pause exploring, to take stock and appreciate where you've come from. Related to that topic of goals, we can often get in this mindset, as you mentioned, of I did this. Oh, well, maybe I can do this. Oh, I did this, so I should do this. How do you know when to step back for a second?
That was going to be chapter 15 in the book, except I couldn't find a formula for it. I really wrestled with this. Like what are the factors that tell you when you've explored enough? I don't think there's a simple answer, because there are problems with, exploring and never being willing to settle down and exploit. But I think something to keep in mind that I think is a good guiding tool is the idea of minimizing regret. So one way of facing an explore-exploit decision is you look at the options and you say, which option has the best realistic upside? Like, so not the best 1 in a million upside, but the best, this could lead to this positive outcome. And if you choose optimistically, if you say, all right, I'm going to, even this is a less certain choice, I'm going to take the choice that has the path to an outcome I really want. You can, in the mathematical sense, you can this should minimize your regret, this feeling, regret is something we understand intuitively. It's also in a mathematical sense. It's the difference between what you get and what you could have got if you'd made perfect choices. So I think thinking in terms of regret is one way of understanding or sorting through the decision about when to stop pushing yourself, when to enjoy what you've got, because there's regret that also accrues if you've got something good and you don't take advantage of it. If you've got a good situation, let's say you've got a good job that fulfills you intellectually, and there might be something better, but this is a really good job. Then if you think about, would I regret it if I gave up this job and things didn't pan out? And would I regret it more than taking a chance? It's still not there's no formula, right? Like, so it depends on what you value and where you are in life and what these things are. But being optimistic in the pursuit of choices and then considering what would be the way of minimizing my regret, I think is a rule to keep in mind.
Yeah, I have two examples that have come to mind as you're saying that. One being, whenever I have Thai, I love pad Thai, and I'm like, oh, but that's so boring. Everyone likes pad Thai. The people in the restaurant are like, oh, come on, be a bit more interesting. But then every time I go for something different, I regret it every single time, because that's just that is a decision that ends up coming with regret for me. I just never enjoy the other meals. But the interesting one that is kind of the other way with I'm thinking about running, when you're in that stage where you're feeling good, maybe you're running more miles than you ever have or faster than you ever have, and you're kind of exploring where your boundary is. But there's a certain point where you're like, oh, I've never run 20 miles before, but I just did it. So maybe I should run 22 next week, and then 24. And then suddenly there's a difference between exploring your boundaries and, oh, wow, I really shouldn't have jumped up that quick and now I'm injured. So being in that moment of running the 20 miles, or, maybe you run 18 and you get to 20 and you feel good and you think, oh, maybe I could do 22. Would I regret that if I end up injured? Yeah, I really would.
And another thing, maybe another way of thinking about that is when you explore into a new place, pause and look around before you explore the next place, right? So if 20 miles is new territory for you, take some time to assimilate and enjoy running 20 miles before you do 22 miles. So, it's not that you stop exploring, but if you're already exploring, and there's another kind of rule of thumb to keep in mind, which is to balance exploration and exploitation. And this comes from the business literature, actually, and looking at scientific career trajectories and artistic career trajectories. The best results come from people who explore, then exploit. So it's not just exploring that leads to breakthroughs, and it's not just exploiting. It's not just, living the grind. But if you explore, you find out what your landscape of possibilities is, and then you exploit. That's just as important. Use what you've just discovered and take advantage of it. So you've just discovered you can run 20 miles. Now see how fast you can race with a 20-mile long run, rather than just keep pushing without seeing what it is you've discovered.
Absolutely. Thank you for clearing that up. That's definitely an important point to make there. Okay, Alex, to wrap up here, you obviously talked about you're exploring in lots of different ways. And I want to commit to exploring different types of music, because that piece really spoke to me. I am such a creature of habit. So I need to find a new artist that I love in 2025. What is something that you are exploring in terms of, an area that you haven't considered or haven't focused on in recent years in 2025?
That is an interesting question. So let me stick with music.
Okay. I
am a jazz fan.
Yes, learned this.
And this is, in a sense, re-exploring. I really want this year to get my saxophone out and start playing again. And my kids are almost getting to the age where we might be able to play some music together. And that's something that will take, I'm saying this, and it may well be that in a year you'll ask me, so how did that go? And I'll say, oh, did I say that? What the hell? But I really think going back to something we were saying before the show started about the importance of connecting with people. It's like, often I think about the things I want to achieve in the sense of, what am I doing? What will it mean for me? And playing some music with my kids, I think, is something that will be rewarding for me musically, but also in terms of building a different kind of connection with my kids and giving them hopefully some memories of fun that we had. So that's a hard thing because it's a lot easier to just go to bed, at the end of a long day rather than say, hey, let's play some music. But that's
I love that.
I'll plant that flag and hope that it forces me to live up to it.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I encourage listeners to think about what that could be for you. Yes, in little ways you want to be doing it daily, but also what's an area that you have been lacking in. So, the explorer's gene, why we seek big challenges, new flavors, and the blank spots on the map. I'll put links in the show notes. Alex, anything you want to leave our listeners with for today?
Really just the hope that 2025 will be a year of doing something they've never done before, thinking something, reading something they've never done before, because I don't think anyone ever regrets doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me. It was such a joy, as always, to catch up. Thank you.
Thanks, Tina. This was a lot of fun.
Before we go any further, I just want to give a quick shout out to the Running for Real team. Without them, I would not be able to do barely anything compared to what I'm able to do today. They are behind the scenes. They are there for me. I am just so appreciative of them. To Jeremy Nessel, our podcast editor, audio consultant, and someone who's been with me since the start. To Sally Pontarelli, our content and operations manager, who is there day to day doing all the things to help me be successful. To Kelsey Wang, our head of design, and Louise Murphy, our associate designer. And finally, to Sandy Gutierrez, our photographer and content strategist. I am appreciative of all of you and wouldn't be able to do what I do without you. Such an interesting episode. Thank you so much to Alex for joining me on the show today. I loved that conversation. I love learning from him, and I hope you enjoyed that one as much as I did. Now, friends, be sure to go check out the link in the show notes to go get yourself a copy of that book. Also, to thank our sponsors for today, you can go to runningforreal.com/episode 437. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you in 2 weeks.